She can't stand rich men who think money counts as personality. He is exactly that type, only with a flawless suit and a stare that can silence an entire room. Their first conversation wasn't a conversation at all. It was a public showdown, packed with nervous laughter and a comeback so sharp it went viral. And when his luxury brand starts taking hits, the PR solution is the most ridiculous one possible. You two need to show up together. What could possibly go wrong when two massive egos get turned into a script? The projector flickered twice before her first slide filled the screen. Violet Carter stood at the center of the stage, clicker in hand, 300 faces staring back at her. The annual Global Brands Conference, the biggest room she had ever commanded. Her heels were new and already punishing her, but she had picked them on purpose. Nothing says confidence like shoes that could double as weapons. She clicked to the next slide, a sleek bottle of Hawthorne Reserve, the most recognized luxury spirit brand in the country. Below it, one word in bold red letters, boring. A ripple moved through the audience, nervous laughter, a few gasps. This, Violet said, pointing at the bottle, is what happens when a brand falls in love with its own reflection. Hawthorne Reserve hasn't changed its messaging in 12 years. The same dark lighting, the same velvet backgrounds, the same man in a suit holding a glass like he's performing surgery. She paused. The world moved on. This brand didn't. She clicked again. A new campaign concept appeared. Bright, irreverent. Young people at a rooftop barbecue, laughing, the bottle sitting casually on a wooden table between paper plates and a half-eaten watermelon. People don't want to worship a brand anymore, she said. They want to belong to one. The applause came fast and warm. She felt it land in her chest like a drumbeat. And then a voice cut through. Fascinating theory. The room turned. Third row, center aisle. A man stood without hurrying. Tall. Dark suit that fit like it had been stitched onto him that morning. His jaw was sharp enough to make the overhead lighting work harder than it needed to. Miles Hawthorne, CEO of Hawthorne Spirits International, owner of the very brand she had just called boring to its face. Violet's fingers tightened around the clicker. You've spent 8 minutes explaining why my company should abandon the identity that made it a market leader, he said. His voice carried the way expensive things do without effort. I'm curious. What exactly qualifies you to tell a brand worth $4 billion that it's doing it wrong? If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. The room held its breath. Violet tilted her head. She could feel her pulse in her throat, but her mouth had never once waited for permission from her nerves. Experience, she said. I've repositioned 6 brands in the last 4 years. 3 of them were in worse shape than yours. She let that land. And honestly, your $4 billion brand is starting to look like a very expensive museum. Someone in the back row let out a laugh they clearly hadn't planned. Miles didn't blink. A museum preserves value. What you're proposing would turn it into a yard sale. A yard sale implies someone would actually show up, she shot back. At the rate your engagement numbers are dropping, you'd be lucky to get foot traffic. The audience was no longer pretending to be neutral. Heads swiveled between them like a tennis match. A woman near the front had her phone out, recording. Miles stepped into the aisle, hands in his pockets, and looked at her with a calm that bordered on insulting. I appreciate creativity, Miss Carter. What I don't appreciate is someone mistaking provocation for strategy. Violet smiled. It was the kind of smile that had gotten her out of trouble, and into it in equal measure. And I don't appreciate someone mistaking stubbornness for standards. But here we are. The moderator stepped in before the next volley, thanked both speakers, asked the audience to hold questions for the networking hour, but the damage, or the magic, was already done. By the time Violet stepped off that stage, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. She hadn't planned to go that far. But something about the way he stood there, so certain, so untouchable, had made her want to crack the glass. She grabbed her bag from the speaker lounge and nearly made it to the elevator before her phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then didn't stop. Her best friend, Dana, had sent 14 messages in 3 minutes. The most recent one was just a link and 5 exclamation marks. The video was already everywhere. Someone had captured the entire exchange in crisp, ruthless detail. By midnight, it had 2 million views. By morning, it was a headline. Ad exec destroys billionaire CEO on stage sat next to Hawthorne fires back at rogue consultant. Memes appeared, edits with dramatic music. One version set the whole thing to a boxing commentary. Half the internet loved her. The other half thought she had been reckless and disrespectful. Miles Hawthorne did not post a response. He didn't need to. His silence said everything his PR team wanted it to. But in a penthouse across the city, he sat in the dark with a glass of his own whiskey and replayed the video one more time. Not because he was angry, because when she smiled at him from that stage, something behind his ribs had shifted, just slightly, like a drawer that had been stuck for years suddenly sliding open. He rubbed the back of his neck. He closed the video. He opened it again. 3 days after the conference, Violet's inbox looked like a crime scene. Interview requests. Think pieces. A podcast invitation titled The Woman Who Roasted a Billionaire. Her agency's phone hadn't stopped ringing, and her boss had gone from mildly amused to genuinely concerned about losing the Hawthorne account, an account they didn't even have yet, but had been courting for months. Violet sat in her cramped office with the door shut, scrolling through comments she knew she shouldn't be reading. Half of them called her brilliant. The other half called her things she wouldn't repeat to her dentist. Her phone rang. Dana. Have you seen the remix? Someone auto-tuned the whole fight. You sound incredible. Dana, I'm being dragged by half the internet. The boring half. The fun half made you a folk hero. Own it. Violet pressed her forehead to the desk. The wood smelled like old coffee and regret. That same morning, 12 blocks east, Miles Hawthorne sat across from his head of public relations. A woman named Patricia Yoon, who had once managed a political scandal so efficiently that the senator involved sent her flowers afterward. She did not look like she was in a flower-receiving mood. The brand sentiment index dropped 9 points since the video, Patricia said, sliding a tablet across the table. We're trending for all the wrong reasons. Investors are asking questions. Miles leaned back. Let them ask. The Frankfurt Group called this morning. They want reassurance that the image of the brand is stable before they finalize the expansion deal. That got his attention. His fingers stilled on the armrest. Patricia folded her hands. I have a proposal. You won't like it. I rarely do. We reframed the narrative. The argument wasn't a confrontation. It was a lover's quarrel. The two of you have been secretly dating. The tension got away from you in public, and now you're making it official. 30 days of joint appearances. Controlled, strategic, camera-ready. The silence that followed was the kind that makes people check if their phone is on mute. Miles stared at her. You're suggesting I pretend to date the woman who publicly compared my company to a museum. I'm suggesting you turn a liability into a love story the internet already ships you to. Half the comments are begging for a sequel. Absolutely not. Across town, Violet was having a nearly identical reaction. Her boss, Richard, delivered the news in his glass-walled office while she stood with her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles turned white. They want me to what? It's a joint proposal from both PR teams, 30 days, public appearances, a few interviews, some social media posts. You smile, he smiles. The scandal becomes a romance. Everyone wins. Everyone except me. Richard leaned forward. Violet. They're offering a full rebranding contract. Your concept, your campaign, but only if you agree to the arrangement. She felt the trap close around her like a seatbelt she hadn't fastened herself. I'm not pretending to date some arrogant, overdressed, multi-million-dollar client. She shut her mouth, opened it again, shut it. For 2 days, both of them refused. Miles told Patricia the idea was beneath him. Violet told Richard she would rather eat her own portfolio. Dana, who had no stake in the matter whatsoever, called it the greatest plot twist in the history of marketing and started planning outfits. But the pressure didn't stop. The Frankfurt Group wanted answers. Violet's agency risked losing credibility. A competing firm leaked a statement calling Hawthorne Reserve a brand in crisis. A gossip site published a body language analysis of the conference video, claiming the tension was clearly romantic. It wasn't. But the internet had decided, and the internet doesn't take corrections well. On the 5th day, they met in a conference room that smelled like leather and printer ink. Neutral ground. Lawyers on both sides. Patricia at the head of the table with a 30-page document titled Partnership Framework for Public Narrative Alignment. Violet walked in first. She was wearing a dark blazer and a look that could curdle milk. Miles arrived 2 minutes later, buttoned up to the collar, his face a mask of professional tolerance. They sat across from each other, Neither spoke first. Patricia cleared her throat. The terms are straightforward. 30 days, 12 joint appearances minimum. Social media coordination, no public disagreements. At the end, you announce an amicable private decision to focus on your careers. Clean exit. Violet's eyes flicked to Miles. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decode. Not hostile, not warm. Something careful, like a man reading the fine print on something he was about to sign anyway. She bit her lower lip without thinking. He noticed. Fine, she said. 30 days. Not a minute more. Miles nodded once. Agreed. They signed the papers without looking at each other again, but as Violet walked out into the hallway, her heels sharp against the marble floor, she felt something she didn't expect. Not relief, not dread. Curiosity. And Miles, still sitting at the table with his pen resting between two fingers, rubbed the back of his neck and stared at the door she had just walked through for longer than any contract required. The first official outing was a restaurant in Midtown Manhattan, so exclusive it didn't have a sign on the door. Just a brass handle and a hostess who looked like she had never been surprised in her life. Violet arrived first. She had spent 40 minutes choosing an outfit that said, "I'm not trying," while very clearly trying. A fitted black top, tailored trousers, a thin gold necklace that sat right against her collarbone. She hated that she cared. Miles walked in 7 minutes late. Not fashionably late, strategically late, the kind designed to let the other person wonder. He sat across from her. His cologne arrived before his words did. Something warm and layered, the kind of scent that made you lean in before you realized you were doing it. She gripped the menu like a shield. "You're late," she said. "You noticed. Hard not to. The reservation was for 8. And yet the table waited." He unfolded his napkin with precision. "Unlike some things, good restaurants don't expire in 7 minutes." The waiter appeared, took their orders, and vanished with the instinct of a man who recognized a battlefield. They sat in silence. The candlelight threw soft shadows across his face, and Violet noticed, and against her will, that his eyes were darker than she remembered from the conference. Not just brown, something deeper, like coffee left to cool. She looked away. "Ground rules," she said. "We're here to be seen, not to bond. We eat, we smile for the cameras outside, we go home. Agreed. And stop looking at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you're evaluating a quarterly report." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Not quite. They ate mostly in silence, exchanging only the words the performance required. Through the window she could see a photographer across the street, long lens pointed at their table. "They're already here," she muttered. Miles didn't turn. "They've been here since I walked in." He said it like he was describing the weather, as if being watched was just another thing that happened to him, like rain. Something about that bothered her. Not the arrogance. She expected that. It was the flatness. The way he wore attention like a coat he couldn't take off. After dinner, they stepped into the cool night air. Flashes popped from across the street. Miles placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her toward the car. She flinched. Not from discomfort, from how warm his hand was through the fabric. "Relax," he said quietly. "We're being watched." "I know. That's the entire point of this disaster." He opened the car door. She climbed in and pulled it shut before he could close it. In the back seat, alone, she exhaled so hard her chest hurt. Her phone buzzed. "Dana. How was it? Did he smell good?" "I bet he smelled good." "I'm not answering that." "So, yes." Violet dropped her head against the leather seat. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on her back, like a print left on wet cement. The second outing was worse. Or better. She couldn't tell anymore. A dinner with investors. Formal. The kind of event where everyone spoke in money and laughed in percentages. Violet wore her armor, her sharpest humor, her quickest deflections, and held her own at a table full of men who looked at her like she was the entertainment. Then one of them asked where she had studied. Simple question. But it landed wrong. She hadn't gone to a fancy school. She had worked 2 jobs to pay for community college and clawed her way into advertising through talent, not connections. She started to answer, casual, rehearsed, but something slipped. A sentence about her mother working nights at a laundromat so Violet could afford textbooks. She hadn't meant to say it. The words fell out like a drawer pulled too far, spilling things she usually kept shut. The table went quiet. The kind of quiet that made her skin burn. She opened her mouth to laugh it off, to redirect, to do what she always did. Miles spoke first. She doesn't need to justify anything to this table. Low, steady, with a weight that silenced the room differently. Not embarrassment, authority. Talent doesn't come with a pedigree. No one argued. Violet didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at him, something in her careful arrangement would collapse. After dinner, the photographers were worse. A wall of flashes and shouted questions. Someone pushed in with a microphone. Miles reached for her hand, not for show, not positioned for a camera angle. He took it, firm, sure, instinctive, and cut a path through the crowd to the car. Inside, she pulled her hand back, but slowly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Her voice was quieter than she wanted. "I know." They rode in silence. His driver, a broad-shouldered man named Gerald with silver temples and kind eyes, glanced in the rearview mirror exactly once. He smiled to himself and said nothing. That night, alone in her apartment, Violet sat on her kitchen counter eating cereal from the box and replaying the moment he had said those words. She doesn't need to justify anything. She bit her lower lip. She hated that it mattered. She hated more that she wanted him to say it again, salt air and morning light. The photo shoot was on a private stretch of beach in the Hamptons, the kind of place designed by someone who had never actually been to a beach but had strong feelings about one. Miles stood near the water in a linen shirt rolled to the elbows. Violet wore a cream wrap top and loose trousers, her hair catching the wind in ways the hairstylist kept trying to control and failing. The photographer, a small man with enormous energy, kept shouting directions. "Closer, lean in, no, like you mean it. Like you'd be devastated if she left." Miles glanced at Violet. "He's very specific. He once made me pose holding a pineapple like it was a newborn. Don't expect logic." They stood side by side, shoulders nearly touching. The waves hissed and pulled behind them. Every time the photographer called for a new position, Miles's hand would find some part of her. Her waist, her arm, the curve of her shoulder. Each touch was brief, professional. And each one sent a current through her skin she refused to name. During a break, while the crew adjusted lighting, Violet wandered toward the shoreline. The sand was cool and damp under her bare feet. She hadn't been to a beach in over a year. Her life was conference rooms and deadlines and takeout containers piled by the sink. Miles appeared beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. "You look different out here," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "A different how?" He seemed to search for the word. His hand drifted to the back of his neck. "Less armed." She almost laughed. "Almost." "That's not a compliment," she said. "It wasn't meant to be one. It's an observation." "Observing what, exactly?" He looked at her. Really looked. The way no one had looked at her in a long time. Not at her clothes or her posture or the version of herself she performed for the world. At her. "That you're tired of pretending too," he said quietly. The wind picked up. Her hair whipped across her face and she pushed it back with both hands, blinking against the sand. And then a wave, unexpected, aggressive, clearly not part of the production plan, surged up and soaked them both from the knees down. Violet yelped. Miles jerked backward, his expensive shoes completely ruined. She looked at his face. He looked at his shoes. And Violet laughed. Not the polished, camera-ready laugh she had been performing for weeks. A real one. Loud and messy and full of surprise. Miles stared at her. His mouth opened, then closed. Then, slowly, like something cracking, he smiled. Not a half smile. Not a press photo smile. A real one. The kind that changed his entire face. The photographer screamed with joy and fired off 30 shots in 10 seconds. Neither of them noticed. 2 nights later, a company gala at the Hawthorne Spirits headquarters. Crystal chandeliers, live jazz, a bartender who treated every cocktail like a small performance. The marketing team had planned every minute of their appearance, arrival together, 2 interviews, 3 photo ops, departure by 11. What they hadn't planned was the band switching to something slow. Violet was mid-conversation with a journalist when Miles appeared at her side. He didn't ask. He extended his hand, palm up, and waited. She looked at the hand, then at him. "This isn't on the schedule," she whispered. "I know." She took his hand. They moved to the edge of the floor. His palm settled on the small of her back. Same spot as that first night at the restaurant. But this time she didn't flinch. Her fingers found the fabric of his jacket just above his shoulder, and she felt the warmth of him through the wool. They swayed, more than danced. The music was low, something with a saxophone that made the air feel thicker. She could smell his cologne again. She was starting to recognize the layers, the cedar underneath, the something softer she couldn't place. Her skin prickled where his thumb traced a small, absent circle on her back. He felt it, the goosebumps rising under her top. He looked down at her, and whatever he saw in her face made his hand press firmer, not pulling her closer, just holding on. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm thinking. Dangerous. For both of us." She looked up. His dark eyes held something she couldn't decipher, something more than the careful control he wore like armor. It was intense, almost raw, and it made her breath catch in a way she covered with a small cough. The song ended. They stepped apart. The distance felt wrong, like peeling off a bandage that had started to heal the wound. Later that week, she found a mint candy on her desk at the agency. No note, no explanation. Just the exact brand she always dug through her bag for after her morning coffee. She held it in her palm and stared at it for a long time. Nobody knew about that habit. Almost nobody. She unwrapped it slowly, placed it on her tongue, and thought about a man who noticed things he had no business noticing. In his office across town, Miles added her favorite restaurant to his delivery contacts and told himself it was efficient planning. He rubbed the back of his neck. It wasn't. Gerald had been driving for the Hawthorne family for 19 years. He had survived 3 CEOs, 2 corporate mergers, and a particularly aggressive squirrel that once got into the company garage. But watching these two in his rearview mirror was starting to test his nerves. It was a Tuesday. Violet had a meeting at the Hawthorne offices to discuss the rebranding campaign, the real one, the work she was actually being paid to do. Miles had sent a car. She hadn't asked for one. She hadn't refused it either, which Gerald noted with quiet satisfaction. She sat in the back seat scrolling through her phone, one foot tucked under her leg. She smelled like vanilla and something citrus. Gerald liked her. She tipped well and never treated him like furniture. "Gerald," she said without looking up, "does he always send cars for people? Or am I getting special treatment?" Gerald glanced in the mirror. "He doesn't send cars for anyone, ma'am." She looked up. He kept his eyes on the road and said nothing else. At the office, Marcus Webb, Miles's right-hand man and the only person in the building allowed to disagree with the boss, was waiting in the lobby. Slim, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that gave nothing away until it gave everything away at once. "Miss Carter, conference room B, he's already inside." "Of course he is. Probably been there since dawn, staring at spreadsheets." Marcus almost smiled. 6:30, actually." She walked past him. Marcus watched her go, then pulled out his phone and texted one word to Gerald. "Confirmed." Gerald texted back a smiley face. Neither of them would have admitted it, but a quiet conspiracy had begun. Marcus noticed it first. The way Miles mentioned her name in meetings where it had no business being mentioned. The way he asked, carefully casual, if the scheduling team had confirmed her availability. The way his jaw tightened every time someone on the PR team referred to her as the asset. Marcus had been waiting years for this. He had watched Miles date women who looked right, spoke right, and bored him within a month. This was different. This woman made his boss lose the thread of his own sentences, so Marcus did what any loyal employee and secret romantic would do. He started quietly removing the exit clauses from the contract. Nothing illegal. Just a few inconvenient delays in paperwork. Meanwhile, across town, Violet's older sister, Helen, was making her feelings known. Helen Carter did not do subtlety. She was 5 years older, 6 inches shorter, and 10 times more suspicious of any man in a suit. "You're glowing," Helen said over the phone. Her tone made it sound like an accusation. "I'm not glowing. I'm stressed. Stress can look like glowing under the right lighting. I've seen the photos, Vi. The beach ones." "That's not stress." Violet pressed her lips together. "I'm not saying he's bad," Helen continued. "I'm saying this whole thing is a terrible idea. Fake relationships don't stay fake. Someone always catches feelings, and it's always the one who can least afford to. I'm not catching anything. You used to say that about colds, and then you'd be in bed for a week." 3 days later came the live interview. A morning show. Bright lights, cheerful hosts, 200 audience members primed with free coffee and talking points about New York's favorite power couple. Miles sat beside her on the couch, one arm stretched behind her. Not touching, just present. His posture said relaxed. His thumb, tapping silently against the cushion behind her shoulder, said otherwise. The host asked how they had gone from adversaries to partners. Slowly, Miles said, and against her will. The audience laughed. Violet rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in it. He's exaggerating. It was mutual suspicion, not hostility. She called my brand a museum on live television. And it worked. Your stock went up 11% after the redesign started. You're welcome. The host leaned in, delighted. So the spark was always there. Neither of them answered right away. The pause was a half-second too long. Then Violet noticed it, a loose thread on the shoulder of his jacket. Dark, barely visible against the navy fabric. Her hand moved before her brain could intervene. She reached over, pinched the thread between her fingernails and pulled it away. It was nothing. The kind of thing you do for someone you've known for years. They both froze. The cameras caught everything. The gentle reach, the way his breath stopped, the way her fingers lingered on the fabric before pulling back, the way she looked at her own hand afterward, like it had acted without permission. The host practically vibrated. The audience went silent, then erupted. In the car afterward, neither spoke for 6 blocks. Gerald drove. He smiled. Violet stared out the window and pressed her fingertips together, still feeling the wool of his jacket. She bit her lower lip and hoped no one could see the flush climbing her neck. Miles sat very still, his hand resting on his thigh, his thumb tracing the exact spot where the thread had been. He could still feel the ghost of her touch on his shoulder, light as a moth landing. He rubbed the back of his neck. Gerald turned up the radio, just enough to give them privacy to say nothing. 16 days into the contract. Violet was losing count of the dinners, the photo ops, the rehearsed smiles. She was not losing count of the moments that fell outside the script. The food deliveries had started a week ago. Every time Miles ordered lunch for a working session, it came from her favorite place, a tiny Italian restaurant on 9th Avenue, where the owner still wrote orders on paper, and the bread arrived warm. Violet had mentioned it once in passing, weeks ago. He never said a word about it. The containers just appeared. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself he probably had an assistant handling it. She told herself this while eating the best penny she'd ever tasted and staring at his handwriting on a sticky note. Extra bread. You always eat the bread first. She peeled the note off and put it in her jacket pocket. She would throw it away later. She didn't. That evening they attended a hospitality conference at a hotel in Greenwich Village. Miles gave a keynote about brand evolution. Measured, intelligent. Violet sat in the second row and tried not to notice how his voice dropped half a register when he made an important point. She noticed. The mingling dragged for hours. By 10 o'clock, she had slipped away. The hotel had an interior garden, a small courtyard hidden behind glass doors, enclosed by ivy-covered walls and lit by low lanterns. Stone benches, a fountain that barely whispered, and the kind of quiet that made the city feel far away. Violet sat and kicked off her heels. The stone was cool under her feet. The air smelled like damp earth and jasmine, and for the first time in weeks she could breathe without an audience. She didn't hear him come in. You disappeared. Miles stood at the entrance, jacket off, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. His hair was slightly out of place, which she had never seen before. I needed 5 minutes without someone asking how we met, she said. He sat beside her, not close, not far. The exact distance of someone who didn't trust himself to be closer. 17 people asked me tonight, he said. I've told the story so many times I almost believe it. She hugged her knees. That's the problem, isn't it? He looked at her. I'm starting to forget which parts are real, she said. Her voice had lost its sharpness. What remained was raw and tired and honest. The fountain murmured. A breeze moved through the ivy. I think about the beach, he said. The wave that ruined my shoes. She almost smiled. Those were expensive shoes. I don't care about the shoes. He paused. His hand went to the back of his neck, then dropped. I care that you laughed. I'd never heard you laugh like that. The air between them thickened like the moment before rain. She looked at her hands. Miles, I know. This isn't part of the deal. I know that too. She should have stood up. She should have put her heels back on and walked through those glass doors and called Dana and made a joke about the whole ridiculous night. Instead, she stayed. He turned toward her slowly. His hand lifted, hesitated, then settled against her jaw. His thumb brushed her cheek, and the callus on his finger caught slightly against her skin. She stopped breathing. His eyes searched hers. Dark, intense, full of something that made her chest ache. She didn't pull away. He kissed her. Slow. So slow it felt like falling. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of whiskey. The hand on her jaw slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading into her hair. Her hands found the front of his shirt, not pulling, just holding on, like gripping the edge of something she wasn't ready to release. The kiss deepened without rushing. His other hand found her waist, warmth seeping through the fabric. She leaned into him, not because a camera demanded it, not because a contract required it, because her body had stopped pretending before her mind had. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers. Their breathing was uneven, tangled, loud in the quiet garden. "That wasn't in the schedule," she whispered. He almost laughed. "No." She pulled back and looked at him. Her lower lip caught between her teeth. He watched her bite it. And something in his expression, that careful, disciplined control, cracked wide open. "We should go back inside," she said. "We should." Neither moved. The jasmine sweetened the air. The fountain kept its low confession. When they returned to the party, they entered through separate doors. She went left. He went right. They did not look at each other for the rest of the evening. But in the car afterward, Violet pressed her fingers to her lips and felt the shape of a kiss that had nothing to do with pretending. And in a penthouse that suddenly felt too large, Miles stood at his window and knew, with the certainty of a man who builds empires, that he was in serious trouble. Neither of them mentioned the kiss. 3 days passed, then 4. They attended a product launch together, posed for photos, answered questions with the practiced ease of two people who had rehearsed their stories so many times the seams had become invisible. But something had shifted beneath the surface, like tectonic plates moving in silence. They stopped touching casually, no hand on the small of her back, no brush of fingers during a toast. The contact they had performed effortlessly for cameras now felt dangerous, loaded with a voltage they couldn't control. Violet threw herself into the rebranding campaign. She worked late, filling whiteboards, running focus groups, refining the pitch that would define Hawthorne Reserve's next decade. The work was good. The work was safe. The work didn't make her pulse jump when it walked into a room. Miles buried himself in quarterly projections. He cancelled 2 social engagements and told Patricia the schedule was too packed. Patricia, who had never seen him cancel anything, exchanged a look with Marcus that said everything words couldn't. But avoidance has a shelf life. On a Wednesday afternoon, Violet arrived at the Hawthorne offices for a campaign review. The conference room was full. Designers, marketing analysts, Patricia with her tablet, Marcus in his usual corner chair. Miles sat at the head of the table, reading through printed layouts. She took the seat farthest from him. He didn't look up, but his grip on the page tightened at the sound of her chair. The meeting lasted an hour. Professional, efficient. Violet presented 3 campaign directions, fielded questions, defended her choices with the sharpness that had made her reputation. Miles asked pointed questions and approved 2 of the 3 concepts with minimal debate. Not once did they look directly at each other. Marcus noticed. Of course, Marcus noticed. After the room emptied, he lingered by the door, watching Miles stare at the same page he'd been holding for 4 minutes. "The 3rd concept was strong," Marcus said. "You should have approved it. It needs refinement. It was the best one, and you know it. You rejected it because she presented it last and you were trying to leave before she looked at you." Miles set down the page. His jaw tightened. Marcus stepped closer. "I've known you 11 years. I've never seen you run from anything. Not a hostile board, not a failed deal, not the Frankfurt negotiation that almost collapsed at midnight. But one woman sits across a conference table and you can't hold your own pen straight. That's enough, Marcus. It's barely a start." Marcus straightened his cuffs. "She's not a business problem you can restructure. She's a person, and she kissed you back." Miles said nothing for a long time. Marcus left. He had said what needed saying. The rest wasn't his to push. That same night, Dana called Violet for what she called an emergency emotional audit. "You've been weird for 5 days. I can hear it in your texts. You're using periods. You never use periods. I'm being grammatically responsible. You're being emotionally constipated. What happened?" Violet lay on her couch, staring at the ceiling. A takeout container sat untouched on the coffee table. She hadn't ordered from her favorite Italian place. She couldn't. "He kissed me," she said. The silence on Dana's end lasted exactly 1 second. Then a shriek so loud Violet had to pull the phone away from her ear. When? Where? Details, all of them now. It was at the hotel, in the garden, it was... She pressed her hand over her eyes. It was real, Dana. That's the problem. Dana's voice softened. Just a fraction. Why is that a problem? Because in 2 weeks this contract ends, and he goes back to being a billionaire who drinks his own whiskey. And I go back to my apartment where the radiator sounds like a dying cat. We're not the same. You weren't the same when he held your hand through that crowd either. Didn't seem to bother his hand. Violet rolled onto her side and curled her knees toward her chest. I can't fall for him, it doesn't make sense. Sweetie, since when does any of this make sense? You fake dated a man you publicly humiliated and now you're moping because his kiss was too good. None of this is in the manual. In the days that followed, the avoidance continued, but it started leaking. Small things. He approved the third campaign concept via email, adding a single line. You were right, it's the strongest one. She replied with a professional thank you that took her 20 minutes to write. He started carrying mint candies in his pocket again. She noticed the bag from her restaurant in the office trash and felt something warm settle behind her ribs. Gerald, driving Miles home one evening, broke a long silence with the gentleness of a man who had earned the right. She asked about you today. Miles looked up. What did she ask? If you seemed okay. Gerald paused. I told her you were miserable. Gerald. You asked what she said. I told you what I said. Both things are true. Miles leaned his head against the window. The city blurred past and lights, noise, 10 million people going somewhere with purpose. He felt like the only one standing still. He rubbed the back of his neck. Gerald watched the mirror and kept driving. The charity gala was held on a rooftop overlooking the East River, the skyline glittering behind floor-to-ceiling glass. 500 guests. Live orchestra. Champagne that cost more per glass than Violet's first month of rent. She wore a deep emerald dress that caught the light when she moved. Helen had helped pick it out, reluctantly because Helen still thought this arrangement was a mistake, but enthusiastically enough to spend 3 hours in fitting rooms. Miles was already there when she arrived. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He turned when the energy in the room shifted. People moved differently when Violet Carter walked in. She didn't know it. He did. Their eyes met across the floor. Something in his chest dropped like an elevator missing a cable. For the first 2 hours they followed the script, separately. Together, only when required. A shared table during dinner, where they discussed auction items with the careful politeness of people defusing a bomb. Then the orchestra shifted. Something slow with strings that made the air feel heavy. Miles found her by the windows, looking out at the river. The city threw gold reflections across the water. She held a glass of champagne she hadn't sipped. You're hiding again, he said. I'm appreciating the view. The view is behind you. She turned. He wasn't looking at the skyline. His dark eyes held that intensity she had been avoiding for weeks. Direct, unguarded, a little reckless. She set down her glass. Don't say things like that. Why not? Because I'll believe you. He held out his hand. She took it. They didn't dance so much as orbit each other, her hand on his shoulder, his on her waist, the space between them shrinking until she could feel his heartbeat against her collarbone. It was faster than she expected. I can't keep doing this, she whispered. Doing what? Pretending I don't feel this. His hand stilled, his breath caught. The controlled, disciplined man she had fought on a stage disappeared, and what was left was someone vulnerable and terrified and completely present. Then stop pretending, he said. They left without telling anyone. Gerald pulled the car around without being asked. The ride was silent, not awkward, charged. She sat close enough that their shoulders touched, and neither pulled away. His apartment was high above the city, quiet. She stood in the middle of his living room and felt the weight of what was happening. He stood across from her, close, but not touching. I'm nervous, she said. She never admitted things like that. He stepped forward. His knuckles brushed her cheek, gentle, barely there, then stopped. His eyes searched her face, asking without words. She pulled him by his collar. The kiss was different from the garden. Deeper, more certain. His hands found her waist and pulled her against him, warmth radiating through every layer between them. Her fingers slid into his hair, and he made a sound low in his throat that sent heat down her spine. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His thumb traced her lower lip. His eyes were dark and open, stripped of every defense he had ever built. "Are you sure?" His voice was rough. She nodded. Then, because nodding wasn't enough, she kissed him again. What followed was slow and tender and inevitable. He held her like she was precious and irreplaceable, every touch carrying the weight of weeks of wanting. His lips moved across her collarbone, her shoulder, the curve of her neck, each kiss a quiet confession. Her hands traced the planes of his back, and she felt his breath shudder against her skin. He whispered her name once, just once, and the way he said it made her eyes sting. She pulled him closer, and the sound of her breathing became the only language that mattered. No performance, no script, just two people choosing each other in the most honest way two people can. Their eyes met in the middle of it, and what she saw in his gaze was something she had never seen from anyone, a devotion so raw it didn't need words. He held her face between his hands and kissed her forehead, her eyelids, the corner of her mouth, as if memorizing her. Afterward, she lay against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. The city hummed far below, muffled by glass and height and the stillness they had built. She fell asleep first, gradually, the way a candle goes out, not all at once but in slow surrender. Miles didn't sleep. He lay still, one arm around her. Her hair spread across the pillow, dark against white cotton. He could feel the warmth of her breathing against his skin, steady and trusting in a way that undid him completely. He had run a company since 28. He had negotiated deals that shaped markets. He had stood before boards and investors and never felt out of his depth. This was different. This woman had walked into his life like a storm he hadn't seen coming. And somewhere between the arguments and the silence, the staged photographs and the unstaged moments, she had become the thing he was most afraid of losing. He pressed his lips to her hair. For the first time, Miles Hawthorne understood that control was not the same as strength. The morning after the gala, Violet woke to the smell of fresh coffee and sunlight pressing through unfamiliar curtains. She reached across the bed, empty, but warm. She found him in the kitchen, barefoot, grey t-shirt, pouring coffee with surgical concentration. His hair was messy. He looked younger, like someone she could have met in a bookstore instead of a boardroom. He looked up. Something crossed his face she would remember for a long time. Not surprise, not relief. Recognition. As if she had always been there and he was only now admitting it. "I don't know how you take your coffee," he said. "Black. 1 sugar. That's how I make mine." "I know. I watched you at 3 different events." He almost dropped the spoon. They ate toast on his kitchen counter because the dining table seated 12 and felt absurd for 2 people in bare feet. She stole his orange juice. He pretended to mind. Their knees touched and neither moved. But the world doesn't wait for people to be ready. By noon, Violet was back at her apartment, still carrying the warmth of the morning like something fragile. She showered, changed, sat at her desk to review campaign files. Her phone lit up at 2:17, then again. Then it didn't stop. She opened the first link Dana sent. The headline hit like ice water. Hawthorne's secret, CEO spotted with ex while dating ad executive. Below it, photographs. Miles and a woman, tall, blonde, striking, wrapped around each other in a restaurant booth, his arm around her shoulders, her face against his neck. The images were intimate, unmistakable, and dated just 10 days ago. Violet's hands went cold. She scrolled. More photos. A parking garage, a hotel lobby, each image stamped with recent dates, each one a knife. She put the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. The woman was Natasha Cole, Miles's ex. Violet had heard the name once from Marcus. She hadn't asked questions then. Now she couldn't stop knowing. Dana called. Violet didn't answer. Helen called. She didn't answer that either. She sat on the edge of her bed and felt something collapse inside her that she hadn't realized she'd been building. Trust. She had trusted him. Not because of the contract or the cameras, because of the mint candies in his pocket, the food from her restaurant, the way his hand trembled against her cheek the night before. Miles called at 4. She watched his name pulse on the screen until it stopped. He called again at 4:12, 4:30, 5. At 5:15, a message. "The photos are old. Natasha manipulated the dates. I can explain everything. Please pick up." She didn't. At 6, he was at her door. She knew before the knock. Gerald's car idling at the curb below. She opened the door but didn't step aside. He looked wrecked. Wrinkled shirt, tight jaw, and something in his eyes she had never seen. Panic. "The photos are from last year," he said. "Before the conference. Before any of this. Natasha released them with altered timestamps. Marcus is tracking the metadata. See, we can prove it. It doesn't matter." "It does matter. I would never—" "You would never what?" Her voice cracked. She hated that it cracked. "Make me feel like an idiot, because that's exactly how I feel. The whole country watched me fall for a man who was apparently with someone else the entire time. I wasn't with her. Not for a single second. The pictures say otherwise. The pictures are a lie." She shook her head. Her lower lip was caught between her teeth, and he could see the tremble she was trying to hide. "I promised myself I would never be this person," she said quietly. "The woman who ignores the red flags because the feelings are too big. Violet. Don't. Sharp enough to cut glass. Don't say my name like that when I can still smell your cologne on my pillow." He flinched. His hand went to the back of his neck and stayed there, gripping hard. "I need you to go," she said. "If you'd just let me—" "I need you to go, Miles." 3 seconds. She counted them. Each one landed like a stone in water. He stepped back, nodded once, walked to the elevator without looking back, because if he looked back he would not be able to leave, and she had asked him to leave. Violet closed the door, locked it, slid down until she was sitting on the floor. She pressed her hands over her face and breathed. In the car, Gerald watched Miles climb in and say nothing. The man's hands were steady, but his eyes were not. Gerald started the engine. 19 years of knowing when to speak and when to drive. He drove. Violet silenced her phone on a Thursday and didn't turn it back on until Monday. She closed her laptop, turned off the television, cancelled 2 client meetings, and told Richard she needed personal time without explaining why. Richard, who had seen her work through a flu, a broken wrist, and the time a pigeon flew into the office window, did not argue. Her apartment became a cocoon of closed curtains and unanswered doors. She ate cereal standing at the sink. She took baths that lasted too long and went cold before she noticed. She reread the same page of a novel 4 times without absorbing a single word. Helen came on Saturday. She didn't knock. She used her spare key, walked in with grocery bags, and found Violet on the couch in the same sweatshirt she'd been wearing for 2 days. "You look terrible," Helen said. "Thank you." Helen set the bags on the counter and began putting things away, with the efficient silence of someone who had been taking care of her little sister since they were children. Eggs, bread, soup, the practical food of survival. "I won't say I told you so," Helen said. "You just did." "No. What I said is that I won't say it. There's a difference." She folded the empty bags. "Are you eating?" "Cereal counts." "Cereal does not count." Helen made eggs. Violet ate them because it was easier than arguing. They sat together on the couch, and Helen didn't ask questions, didn't push, didn't fill the silence with advice. She just sat there, solid and warm, the way she had sat beside Violet after their mother's back surgery, after Violet's first real heartbreak at 23, after every moment when the world tilted sideways and someone needed to be the ground. Across the city, Miles was unraveling in a quieter, more expensive way. He went to the office. He sat in meetings. He signed documents and approved budgets and responded to emails with his usual precision. But Marcus, who sat in on every meeting, could see it, the hollow space behind the efficiency. Miles was operating on autopilot, and the fuel was running out. He stopped eating lunch. He stayed at the office until midnight, then later, as if work could fill the space she had left. His apartment felt hostile. The kitchen counter where they'd sat with toast, the pillow that still carried a trace of her shampoo. He didn't wash the sheets for a week, and he hated himself for it. Marcus investigated the photographs with the tenacity of a man solving a personal grudge. It took him 4 days. He tracked the original image files through the photographer's agency, pulled metadata that proved the photos were 11 months old, and traced the leak to a publicist connected to Natasha Cole. He brought the evidence to Miles on a Tuesday morning. A folder, printed documents, digital timestamps that couldn't be disputed. Miles looked at the folder. "Send it to her." "I tried. She blocked my number. She blocked yours. She won't answer Dana's calls about anything related to you." Miles stared at the window. The city stretched out below him, indifferent to his problems. "She thinks I betrayed her," he said, not angry, not defensive, just broken in a way Marcus had never heard before. Then prove her wrong. She doesn't want proof, she wants distance. Marcus set the folder on the desk and straightened his tie. With respect, sir, that's the dumbest thing you've ever said. And you once turned down a merger with a handshake because you didn't like the man's shoes. Miles almost smiled. Almost. Gerald, who heard everything that happened in the back seat and the front seat and occasionally through the partition that no one remembered to close, was less diplomatic. On a Wednesday evening, parked outside the office, he turned to Marcus, who had walked him to the car to discuss the schedule. He's not sleeping, Gerald said. Sits in the back seat staring at his phone like it owes him money. Hasn't played music in the car once since she left. You know what that means. It means he's miserable. It means he's an idiot. Gerald's voice was gentle despite the words. She sits in my car too, you know. Or she did. Cried once on the way home from an event. Thought I couldn't hear. I turned up the radio, same as I do for him. He shook his head. If that man doesn't go after her, I'll do it myself. Marcus leaned against the car and looked up at the building, at the light still burning on the top floor. He will, Marcus said. He just doesn't know it yet. Well, tell him to hurry up. I'm running out of radio stations. Inside his office, Miles sat alone. The folder of evidence lay open on his desk. The proof was there, clear, undeniable. But proof wasn't what she needed. She needed him to show up, not as a CEO with documentation. As a man who had fallen in love and was willing to stand at her door and say it out loud. He rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't ready, but he was getting closer. 2 weeks after the photos. A Tuesday morning that started like every other. Grey sky, cold coffee, the radiator groaning its usual complaints. Violet stood in her bathroom staring at a plastic stick on the edge of the sink. 2 lines. She picked it up, set it down, picked it up again. She bought 3 more tests from the pharmacy. Different brands, as if the problem might be loyalty to one manufacturer. 6 lines total. She sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and stayed there until the light outside changed from grey to orange to dark. She didn't cry. The feeling was too big for crying. It sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water, and the ripples hadn't reached the edges yet. A baby. His baby. The man she couldn't talk to. The man whose face she still saw when she closed her eyes. The man whose cologne she had finally washed out of her pillowcase, only to miss it so badly she couldn't sleep. She called Dana at 11 that night. I need you to come over, and I need you to swear on everything you love that you will not tell a single living person what I'm about to say. Dana arrived in 22 minutes, wearing pajama pants and a coat over a tank top. She had brought chocolate, tissues, and ginger ale, because Dana always prepared for every possible emergency. Violet told her. Dana's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God. You said that. Dana sat heavily on the couch and stared with the wide, glassy expression of someone processing too much at once. Then her hand found Violet's and squeezed. Okay, Dana said. We're going to figure this out. I don't even know what this is yet. That's why I said we. She squeezed harder. Are you scared? Violet looked at her best friend. The answer was so obvious she didn't bother saying it. Dana stayed the night. She slept on the couch with one arm hanging off the edge and her phone clutched to her chest. Violet lay awake, one hand resting on her stomach, waiting for an answer from someone who didn't have words yet. The secret lasted 23 hours. Dana tried. She went to work and kept her mouth shut through 2 meetings, a lunch break, and a phone call with her mother where she nearly bit through her tongue. But by 4 in the afternoon the wait was unbearable. She didn't call Miles. She wasn't that reckless. She called Marcus. Hypothetically, Dana said, and Marcus sat up straighter, because nothing good had ever followed that word. If someone close to Violet had news that might be relevant to your boss's personal life, how would that be delivered? Marcus was quiet for 3 seconds. What kind of news? The kind that changes everything. Hypothetically. Are we still speaking hypothetically? We both know we're not. Marcus closed his office door. Tell me. Dana talked around it with the precision of someone technically keeping a promise while absolutely breaking it. She mentioned doctor's appointments, timing, how Violet had been sick 2 mornings in a row. Marcus understood before the second sentence ended. He sat at his desk for 10 minutes. Then he stood, straightened his tie, and walked to Miles's office. Miles was at the window. He had been at the window a lot lately. Marcus sometimes wondered if the man was watching the city or searching for her. "I need to tell you something. You should sit down." Miles didn't sit. He never did when asked. But he turned with the expression of a man bracing for another blow. Marcus told him. The silence that followed was unlike any in their 11 years together. Not cold or strategic. It was the silence of a man being rebuilt from the inside. Miles's hand went to his neck, dropped, went back. "How far along?" "Barely audible." "Early. A few weeks." "Does she know that I know?" "No." Miles turned back to the window. The city blurred, not from the glass. He had already been planning to go to her. 3 nights of pacing, drafting speeches in his head and discarding everyone. He had already decided. But this was the wall crumbling. The last excuse to hesitate, gone. Not because of obligation, not because of duty. Because the woman he loved was carrying their child, and she was alone, and he had spent 2 weeks being a coward. "Cancel my afternoon," he said. Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "All of it." "Done?" Miles grabbed his jacket. At the door, he stopped. "Marcus." "Sir." "Thank you." Marcus watched him leave, and allowed himself for the first time in 11 years of professional composure, a very small, very satisfied smile. Gerald didn't ask where they were going. He already knew. Miles sat in the back seat with his hands on his knees, fingers spread, pressing down as if anchoring himself to something solid. The city streaked past the window, but inside the car the air was still. Gerald took the long way. He wanted to give the man time to breathe. "Gerald." "Sir." "If she tells me to leave again, I'm going to leave." Gerald adjusted the mirror. "No, you're not." Miles looked up. 19 years I've driven this family," Gerald said, warm and unhurried. "I've seen your father close deals, your mother host galas. You build an empire in the back of this car with a phone and stubbornness. But I have never seen you look at anything the way you look at that woman." He paused at a red light. "So, no, sir. Not tonight." Miles said nothing, but his hands relaxed against his knees. They arrived as the last light drained from the sky. Purple above the rooftops, street lamps flickering on. Miles stood on the sidewalk and looked up. Her light was on. 3 flights of stairs, each step heavier than the last. By the time he reached her door, his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. He knocked. Silence. Footsteps. Slow, cautious, stopping on the other side. "It's me," he said. The door opened. Violet stood in an oversized sweater and no shoes. Her hair was pulled back loosely, shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. She looked exhausted. She looked beautiful. She looked like she hadn't decided whether to let him in or shut him out forever. He stayed exactly where he was. "I'm not here about the contract," he said, "or the photos, or the press." She crossed her arms. "I'm here because 2 months ago, a woman called my company boring to my face, and I haven't been the same since." His voice was steady, but barely. "I fell in love with you. I fought it every day, and I lost completely." Her jaw tightened. Her eyes were filling. The photos were fake. Natasha manipulated the timestamps. Marcus has the proof, metadata, original files, a statement from the photographer's agency. "But that's not why I came." His hand went to the back of his neck, then he forced it down. Not this time. This time he would stand with his hands at his sides and be completely exposed. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I've spent my life controlling everything. Meetings, deals, outcomes. And you're the one thing I can't control. It terrifies me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you to believe that there hasn't been anyone else. Not before the contract, not during, not after. Just you." He stopped. The rest was hers. Violet stood still, her lower lip trembling, caught between her teeth, in that way he had learned to read like a language only he spoke. Her voice came small and cracked. "You already know, don't you?" He swallowed, nodded. "I came for you," he said, "but now I have 2 reasons to never leave again." She broke. Not dramatically, not loudly. The way real people do, a breath that catches, a hand reaching out, a step forward that closes the distance between everything they've been and everything they could be. She walked into him and he caught her. His arms closed tight, pulling her against his chest. She pressed her face into his collar and let the tears come. One hand cradled the back of her head, fingers in her hair. The other wrapped around her waist as if the world might try to pull her away, and he would not allow it. They stood in the doorway. Not inside, not outside. In between. The hallway light buzzed. Somewhere downstairs, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. She pulled back enough to look at him. Her eyes were red and full of something that made his chest ache in the best possible way. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." "You don't get scared." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I've been scared every day since you walked off that stage." She laughed. Wet and broken and real. He kissed her forehead, her temple, the salt-streaked curve of her cheek. When he finally kissed her mouth, it tasted like tears and mint and the beginning of something no contract could contain. Down on the street, Gerald sat with the engine off and the window cracked. The evening air smelled like rain. He pulled out his phone and sent Marcus one message. She let him in. Marcus replied in 4 seconds, about time. Gerald smiled, leaned his seat back and closed his eyes. He had a feeling he'd be waiting a while. They didn't announce anything. No press release, no social media post, no carefully staged photograph. They just started being together. Quietly. Honestly. Without a contract telling them where to stand. The first week was strange in the best way. Violet kept catching herself waiting for instructions. What event to attend, what to wear, where to smile. But there were no instructions anymore. Just Miles, showing up with takeout from the Italian place on 9th Avenue, and a look on his face like he couldn't believe she'd let him through the door. They argued on the second night. Something small. He rearranged her spice rack without asking, and she told him her kitchen was not a corporate merger he could restructure. He stared at her for 3 seconds, then laughed so hard he had to lean against the counter. She threw a dish towel at his head. He caught it, pulled her in by the wrist, kissed her forehead, and the argument dissolved into something warmer than either expected. Dana was insufferable. She called herself the architect of the reunion and demanded to be named godmother before there was even a conversation about godmothers. She texted Marcus daily with updates no one asked for. Marcus responded with single-word replies that somehow conveyed complete sentences. Helen reserved judgment for exactly one dinner. Violet brought Miles to Helen's apartment on a Sunday evening. Small, filled with books and the smell of roasted chicken and the warmth of a home lived in properly. Helen opened the door, looked Miles up and down and said, "You're taller than I expected. I get that a lot. Sit down. Don't touch anything breakable." Helen asked questions like a detective, casual on the surface, precision underneath. Miles answered without flinching. He didn't perform. He talked about inheriting a company he hadn't built, about learning to lead at 28, about the loneliness of decisions that affect thousands of people. Then, while clearing plates, Helen paused behind Violet's chair and saw it. Miles was watching Violet tell a story about a disastrous college presentation, hands waving, completely unaware of her audience, and he looked at her the way people look at things they've spent their whole life searching for. Helen set the plates in the sink. At the door, she pulled Violet aside and whispered, "Fine, he can stay." Gerald, naturally, had known from the start. The morning after the reconciliation, Miles climbed into the car, and Gerald simply said, "Good." Miles looked at him. "That's all I'm going to say. Good." But the following week, when Violet slid into the back seat heading to a doctor's appointment, Gerald had placed a small wrapped candy on the leather. Mint, her brand. She picked it up and met his eyes in the mirror. "He's not the only one who pays attention," Gerald said. She laughed, the kind that made Gerald's whole week. Weeks passed. The rebranding campaign launched to enormous success. Violet's concept transformed Hawthorne Reserve from a cold luxury brand into something people connected with. Sales climbed. The Frankfurt Group signed the expansion deal. Violet's belly grew, and with it, a softness in Miles his employees had never seen. He left meetings on time. He smiled in the elevator. He once asked the office manager about her daughter's soccer game, and the woman nearly fainted. One evening, 6 weeks after the reunion, Miles cooked dinner. This alone was remarkable. Violet had never seen him near a stove. The result was edible, if generous with salt, and they ate at her small kitchen table with mismatched plates and a candle he'd clearly bought that afternoon because the price tag was still on the bottom. After dinner, he leaned back and looked at her. "I have a question," he said. "If it's about the salt, I'm not answering." "It's not about the salt." He paused. Then, with perfect deadpan, in exactly the tone he had used at the conference, the one that started everything, he said, "I'm curious. What exactly qualifies you to tell a man worth $4 billion how the rest of his life should go? She recognized it instantly. The phrasing, the cadence, the arrogance that had infuriated her on a stage in front of 300 people. Her eyes widened. He pulled out a small velvet box, opened it. A ring, elegant, simple, exactly her. "This time," he said, and his voice was no longer steady, "the answer can be gentler." She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. "I'll consider it," she whispered. He slid the ring on. It fit perfectly. She grabbed him by the collar, just like the first time, just like every time, and kissed him. The kiss tasted like salt and tears and the beginning of something permanent. When she pulled back, she was laughing and crying, both at once. "You rehearsed that," she said, "for 3 weeks. It was perfect." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know." She hit his shoulder. He caught her hand and held it. The candle flickered between them, price tag and all. The wedding was small, which surprised everyone who knew Miles Hawthorne, and absolutely no one who knew Violet Carter. 60 guests, a garden terrace at a restored estate in upstate New York, with white chairs arranged beneath old maple trees and lanterns strung between the branches like low-hanging stars. The air smelled like cut grass and late summer roses, and a string quartet played something soft that drifted across the lawn like a secret being told. Violet walked herself halfway down the aisle. Then Helen stepped in from the front row, took her arm, and walked the rest with her. It hadn't been planned. Helen just stood up, smoothed her dress, and said quietly, "You're not doing this alone." Violet squeezed her sister's arm so hard, her fingers ached. Miles stood at the end of the aisle in a dark suit. No tie, top button undone, exactly the way he'd looked the night everything changed. His hands were steady. His eyes were not. When she reached him, he took her hands. His thumb traced a circle on her wrist, and she felt her pulse jump against it. "You look terrified," she whispered. "I'm not terrified. Your neck says otherwise." His hand twitched toward it. He stopped himself. She grinned. The ceremony was brief and honest. No poems. No elaborate vows written on scented paper. They spoke plainly, the way they had always spoken to each other, with sharp edges and warm centers, and the kind of truth that only comes from people who stopped pretending a long time ago. When the officiant said the words, Miles kissed her before the sentence was finished. The guests laughed. Dana sobbed openly from the second row. Marcus, seated beside her, offered a handkerchief without looking at her, which only made her cry harder. Gerald sat in the last row with his hands folded and his eyes bright. When Violet had invited him, he'd said, "I was coming whether you asked or not." At the reception, Dana gave a toast that was 2 parts heartfelt and 1 part chaos. She told the story of the phone call with Marcus, the 26-hour secret, and the moment she realized she had accidentally set in motion the most important reconciliation of 2 people she loved. "I'm not saying I'm responsible for this marriage," she said, holding up her champagne, "but I am saying that without me, these 2 would still be sulking in separate cars." Marcus raised his glass from across the room. "She's not wrong." Helen spoke next, shorter, quieter. She looked at Violet and said, "I spent your whole life trying to protect you from getting hurt. Turns out the bravest thing you ever did was let someone in anyway." She turned to Miles. "Take care of her. And if you rearrange her spice rack again, I'll know." Miles nodded gravely. "Understood." The night wound down slowly, the way good nights do, in soft light and low conversation, and the clinking of glasses being set down for the last time. Violet danced with Gerald, who turned out to be an excellent dancer and a terrible singer, both of which he demonstrated simultaneously. Miles danced with Helen, who told him 3 things he would never repeat, and 1 thing that made him blink fast and look away. Later, alone on the terrace, Violet leaned against Miles and watched the lanterns sway. "We started with a fight," she said. "We started with you calling my brand boring in front of 300 people. It was boring. It was a $4 billion brand. Still boring." He kissed her temple. She closed her eyes. 1 year later, a Sunday morning. Sunlight through curtains. The apartment was different now, bigger but still messy in the way that only real homes are. Shoes by the door, a stack of campaign drafts on the kitchen counter, a pacifier balanced on a coffee mug. Their daughter, Lily, was 7 months old. She had her father's dark, intense eyes and her mother's stubborn mouth, and she had recently discovered that grabbing fistfuls of Miles's hair was the funniest thing in the known universe. Miles sat on the living room floor, the CEO of a $4 billion company, in sweatpants and bare feet, holding a baby who was systematically dismantling his dignity. Lily shrieked with delight. He winced, gently freed his hair, and she grabbed it again immediately. Violet watched from the doorway with her coffee, biting her lip to keep from laughing. "She gets that from you," Miles said. "The hair-pulling or the stubbornness?" "Both." A journalist had asked them weeks ago at a joint press appearance for the rebranded campaign how it all began. They had looked at each other across the interview table, the same way they had looked at each other across a conference stage, a restaurant, a dance floor, a garden, a hallway, and answered at the exact same time. "By accident." The journalist smiled. The cameras clicked. But what came after? The choosing, the staying, the fighting and forgiving and building something real from something false. That was never an accident. That was the whole point. Gerald still drove them. Marcus still ran the strategy. Dana still couldn't keep a secret. Helen still worried. And every morning, without fail, there was a mint candy waiting on the kitchen counter. Some things don't need a contract. End of narrative. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.